fifth graders. Today we are going to continue with our 13 colonies unit, and we're going to be learning about the Wampanoag History and the Mayflower Compact, along with the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut, which were the two early forms of constitution that the colonists had. So we're going to get started with Wampanoag history. I think it's really important for us to learn about the history of the Wampanoag people because they were the people who were native to the land. They were there before any Europeans came, and they already had a settlement. So they had a form of leadership and a way that their society was organized and lived on the land, and then that was interrupted in a pretty violent way by the colonizers or the colonists. So we're going to go ahead and go through their history, and then we'll talk about the documents that the Pilgrims developed when they came over on the Mayflower. So Wampanoag means people of light, and that's what they were called. They had been living in the settlements on this land for over 12,000 years before the Pilgrims came. So that's a really long time that they had been living with the land, using the land, and respecting the land, and living there. The Wampanoag people lived in southeastern Massachusetts and eastern Rhode Island. So if you look at the map at the top of the slide, you can see the part of this part of the United States that the Wampanoag territory was, and it extended all the way out to the coast, and then that little like hook-like part that I think looks kind of like a witch's shoe. That's how I always think of it. And then also the two islands there. That was all Wampanoag territory for over 12,000 years before the Pilgrims came. When all the time that the Wampanoag were living there, they hunted mastodon, caribou, deer, bear, and other animals, and some birds. For food and medicine, they fished and they foraged for fruits and nuts and berries and leafy plants and barks and roots. And so since they were doing this for so many years, and it was just their whole way of life, they had all of this knowledge and of the land, and this was knowledge that the Pilgrims did not have at all. So they definitely had kind of the upper hand in being able to survive on the land and live well. They also created shelters and woven mats and all their household goods out of wood, bark, and grasses. So where they were living, it wasn't like, I think in some history books, it's portrayed like the native people were just kind of roaming all around, and then the white men came and made it like civilized. And that's totally false. The native people had villages, and this land that they were living on was, they didn't feel that they owned it. They used the land and showed it respect that way, but they definitely had settled villages where this was their home. Patuxet was the name of the settlement, and the English renamed that settlement Plymouth when they colonized it. So yesterday I read the book Squanto's Journey, and you might remember when Squanto returned from being kidnapped and held captive by the English, he was held captive by explorers, and then he returned with the English to the New World. He went back to Patuxet, and he was like the only surviving member. And then he watched it become, or he saw that it was becoming Plymouth. I'm going to disappear for a second so you can see this whole part. The Wampanoag people did know that of all the boundaries of the territory they lived on, they knew this land so well. They farmed it. They knew every single spot of this land. They knew exactly where their territory ended. But they really felt like the land was not owned by anyone. The land was held and used with respect by all. And that was just the way that Native people viewed the land. They were thankful for the land and used the land that way, but they didn't really believe in ownership of it like the colonizers did when they came over. The colonizers wanted to own the land, even though somebody else already lived there. They also had celebrations, and they had these both like in each season and monthly sometimes, and it was like a whole community celebration to give thanks for the land and the crops. So there's this idea also that the settlers, the white settlers, are the ones who like brought Thanksgiving and kind of like showed the Native Americans how to give thanks for their bounty. But this was something that the Native people were doing for years and years and years, and did regularly. It was a way that they showed thanks for their land and brought everyone together. So they definitely had an organized way of living too. So even though the white settlers came in and said, "Oh, we've got to have, we have to civilize this and make all these laws and rules so that we can live here," the Wampanoags did this too. They had leaders. So there were councils of elders. Elders means older people. So there was a lot of respect for people as they age in Native culture. And they had the sachems, which were their chiefs, and clan leaders. And these leaders brought everyone together, made sure that people were taken care of, families were taken care of. The whole tribe was, there was pride and protection of the tribe. The language was called Wampanoag, and there's a couple like characters in that word that I couldn't make with the keyboard I have, so it's not spelled completely correctly, but their language consisted of really long words, and so one Wampanoag word was often an entire sentence in English. And I remember reading that that some Englishmen, when they heard the Wampanoag speaking their language, said it sounded like a rippling brook, like a stream that was rippling, because the words were so long. And colonizers forced English on the Wampanoag. So they were trying to make the Wampanoag assimilate to their culture, and so they were taking the Wampanoag language away and forcing them to speak English. So the original language, it wasn't really used by many for a very long time, but today there are Wampanoag people still living today, which I have a video for you guys to watch about present day Wampanoag people. They're using some like documents that have been preserved that have like English to Wampanoag translations, so that they can like learn that language that was almost lost. So that's pretty cool. And then I'm going to disappear again for a second. So the English, Dutch, and French explorers kidnapped many Wampanoag and brought them back to Europe in the 1600s. That's what happened to Squanto. And because of that, those Europeans brought the sickness, and we talked about this a lot when we did the Explorer unit. And this started a plague, kind of like what we're going through right now, from 1616 to 1618. And you know, back then, medical advances were not as advanced as they are today. So like viruses and sickness, the science behind treating those things and preventing those things wasn't as developed as it is now. So many people died, and many native people died. So many people died in the Patuxent village that the whole village was abandoned. And this is when the Pilgrims came and said, "Oh, look, you know, like obviously this was a place that people were living. There were shelters and there were community buildings and everything, but since no one was there, they just thought it was theirs for the taking." So this is a map of the same area. So this is the area of the Connecticut and Massachusetts and Rhode Island colonies. And you can see that green, what's shaded in green is all where it, what we're talking about with the colonies. And you could see all of the native people that were living in this area and who still live in this area. You know, to this day, there are still native people living in this area. And you could see though that these were settled, this was settled land. So it wasn't just like native people would be wandering around. These were their homes that colonizers came and took. So you could see that present day Martha's Vineyard is one island and Nantucket is the other island. And those were also Wampanoag territory. But I just wanted you to see that there were quite a few Native American tribes in this area that were very negatively affected by the Englishmen and their colonization. Okay, so we're going to talk now about the Mayflower Compact. This is, I'm not sure if this is a replica or like a model of the Mayflower Compact. I'm kind of guessing that's what it is. But you can see it's not super long. There were a lot of signers of this thing, but this is what the Pilgrims put together as sort of like an agreement of how they were going to rule themselves in their new land, what they thought was their new land. And so I'm not going to read it because the language is very, very difficult for us to understand because it's not present day language or modern language. But we're just going to kind of go through the highlights of it instead. So it's one of two early constitutions of the British colonies. By that, I mean that there was the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut that were like the laws that they wrote, and then this was kind of like more of a overarching like agreement that they were making. And these two documents kind of led to the development of the United States Constitution. It stated that their reasons for voyage were for, and this is quoted in the document, the glory of God. They also said that spreading Christianity was very important to them and honoring the king, that was King James at the time. They made a promise to make a colony in Northern Virginia and form an organized government. And they said that their goal was to create fair laws and political offices for the good of the colony. So all of these things were stated in the Mayflower Compact. The compact was signed on November 11, 1620, and 41 Englishmen signed it. No women, no native people, no slaves, but just wealthy white men signed this document. Then there was the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut. Again, really long document, super scrawly writing, very difficult to understand how they wrote things and words that they use. So we're going to kind of dissect it in, I've already dissected it into modern language for you. So first, it states that the colony is formed in Connecticut because of God's will. And then it explains that God expects people who gather together to be peaceful and create an orderly government with laws to obey. So remember, we're talking about Puritans and Pilgrims, and so religion's pretty important to both of them. This whole document was signed in 1639, so quite a few years later than the Mayflower Compact, and it included 11 laws. I'm just going to highlight kind of the biggest laws that were in there. The first part talked about that there would be 2 assemblies, so like 2 gatherings of people per year. And the first one would be the Court of Election. And in that one, the public officials would be elected. And then they would have another assembly or another group meeting where they would make laws. And they said in this document that all the voting would be done on a piece of paper where you vote for your favorite person that's running and write it down, and then the votes are counted and the person who gets the most vote wins. Okay, so you can kind of see how this is the beginning of the start of our way of voting now in our democracy. And then it also said that governors would serve 2 years, but they must belong to an approved church in order to serve. So remember, we had talked about other people who were dissenters who went out to Rhode Island, like they wouldn't be able to run because they weren't belonging to the approved church. Okay, either the Church of England, or they had to either basically be a Puritan or a Pilgrim. And then a representative from each town was sent to the assemblies, so sent to the gatherings to vote and make laws. So this was kind of like the beginning of the House of Representatives. And a big law was that everyone must follow the laws. So there's no exceptions, everybody must follow the laws. I put my sources in here, especially for the Wampanoag information, because I received a lot of great suggestions for sources to go to. And I will, this will be up here in case you want to check out some more information on any of these sites. And then I have 2 videos that I want you guys to watch that I'm putting with this assignment. I know it's kind of a lot to watch today, so you can kind of spread it out a little bit, but the Wampanoag Way is an 8-minute video that shows Wampanoag people living today, and then it also shows how those Wampanoag people learn about their Wampanoag heritage. So by doing like reenactments, which is really cool. So it's a really great visual too, to kind of see the way that the Wampanoag people lived and how established they were in their community when they were colonized. And then the other one is called Mayflower Compact, and it's just a 4-minute video. It's a PBS video. And this one is kind of about the Mayflower and how the Mayflower Compact came to be. So I want you to watch those 2 videos. And then on Schoology, you have 2 questions today. One is, how would you describe the Wampanoag people based on what you've learned about their history and how they lived, and give an example? And then the second one is, do you think the Mayflower Compact and Fundamental Orders of Connecticut were missing any laws? So do you think if there were laws that should have been in there, and what would those be, and why would they need to be in there? Okay, so those are your 2 Schoology discussion questions for today. That is it for today. Sorry that I turned my face off for so long again, but I am really excited to learn more about about the 13 colonies with you guys, and the next couple ones we're going to learn about the Puritans and the Salem witch trials, and then we're going to move on to the middle colonies. But we'll keep going on.